In the coming weeks, Ashera continued, there will be much change in your empire. There will be battles and losses and the reckoning with betrayal. But I want you both to remember this moment. I want you to remember that even the most wounded among us can be healed if we are given the opportunity to trust again. Ashok turned to look at his brother and Devendra. The drums stopped beating that morning. Prince Devendra had always known that silence, more than any sword, was the sound of death in the imperial court. For 3 days, the ceremonial drums had announced his imprisonment, a rhythmic reminder that a prince of the Maurya dynasty was now a disgrace. But when dawn broke on the 4th day and no drums sounded, he knew. Today was the day they would execute him. He sat in the darkness of his cell, a space no larger than a merchant's storage room, with chains around his wrists so heavy they had worn the skin beneath to bleeding flesh. The cell was carved into the mountain itself, deep beneath the imperial palace in Pataliputra, where no one could hear screams, where no one would ever find a body. Devendra was 32 years old. He had been born into silk and golden light, raised on lessons of governance and philosophy, groomed to rule an empire that stretched across half of the known world. 7 years ago, he had been the heir apparent, celebrated, feared, respected. His father, Emperor Vikrama, had loved him fiercely. Everyone said so. Then came the night that changed everything. It was his younger brother, Prince Ashok, who had orchestrated it. Ashok had always been the jealous one, the second son born into shadow, forever watching Devendra step into sunlight. But Devendra had never seen the conspiracy coming. He had been too confident, too secure in his birthright, too blind to the hunger in his brother's eyes. The accusation was treason. Ashok had fabricated letters, forged seals, created an entire narrative suggesting that Devendra was plotting with the Greek kingdoms to overthrow their father. He had even bribed court officials to testify. And in the chaos of court politics, with whispers and accusations flying like vultures, Emperor Vikrama, confused, aging, desperate to maintain order, had believed his younger son. Devendra had not been allowed to speak in his own defense. The trial lasted 1 hour. The verdict was death. His father would not see him, would not hear him. The emperor had declared publicly that to even speak Devendra's name was treason. 7 years. 7 years in this cell, eating gruel that tasted like dust, drinking water that smelled of stone and despair. 7 years of chains. 7 years of waiting for a death that felt more merciful than this living tomb. Devendra's mother had died in her grief 2 years into his imprisonment. He had not been told immediately. A guard had whispered it to him one night, his voice thick with pity. By the time he knew, she had already been cremated, her ashes scattered in the Ganges. He had never said goodbye, never told her he was innocent. His father had died 6 months ago. Ashok was now emperor. And this morning, when the drums fell silent, Devendra understood that his brother had finally decided to end this chapter of uncertainty. Dead princes, after all, could not become martyrs if no one knew they were being executed. The light that filtered through the single barred window at the top of his cell grew brighter as the sun climbed. Devendra closed his eyes and tried to remember what his mother's voice sounded like. He could not. The memory had faded like old cloth left too long in the sun. He heard footsteps. Heavy, deliberate footsteps echoing down the stone corridor. They were coming for him now. Devendra stood, chains rattling, and straightened his prison clothes. Once a royal tunic, now reduced to rags. He would not beg. He would not weep. If death was coming, he would meet it like a prince, like a man who knew the truth of his innocence even if the world would never know it. The footsteps stopped outside his cell. A key turned in the lock. The heavy wooden door creaked open. But the man standing in the doorway was not an executioner. He was an old man, ancient almost, with a face carved by decades and eyes that held a strange sadness. He wore the crimson robes of a temple monk, not the black of the palace guard. Prince Devendra, the monk said softly, his voice carrying an accent Devendra did not recognize. I have come with a proposition that may save your life. But you must choose quickly. We have very little time. Devendra's heart began to race. For 7 years, he had not allowed himself to hope. Hope was a luxury that the imprisoned could not afford. But in that moment, looking at this stranger's face, he felt something crack open inside his chest. Who are you? Devendra whispered. My name is Ashera, the monk replied. And I serve something far greater than emperors, or empires. I serve the truth, and I know you are innocent." They rode through the night on horses that seemed to know the mountain paths by instinct alone. Devendra's legs, weak from years of imprisonment, could barely grip the saddle. The chains had been removed, but the scars they left behind were still raw. Pain shot through his wrists with every movement, but he did not complain. Pain was proof that he was alive. Ashok spoke very little as they traveled. He was a careful man, always checking behind them, always listening to the sounds of the forest. Twice he pulled them off the road, hiding in the dense undergrowth as palace guards galloped past, their torches lighting up the darkness like angry spirits searching for something lost. "They will hunt you," Ashok had said before they left. "Your brother cannot have word of your escape reaching the Empire. It would undermine his authority. You are either dead or you disappear forever. There is no third option. Why are you doing this?" Devendra had asked. Ashok had not answered immediately. He had simply gathered 2 horses and supplies, moving with the efficiency of someone who had done this before. Finally, as they mounted to leave, he had said, "Because I had a vision. The goddess came to me in a dream 3 nights ago. She showed me your face. She told me you must not die. Not yet. Your purpose in this world is not finished." Devendra did not know if he believed in visions or goddesses, but he was not in a position to question providence. They traveled for 5 days, moving steadily higher into the mountains until the air became thin and cold, and snow began to appear on the peaks around them. Devendra had never been to this part of the empire before. The landscape felt alien, untamed, far removed from the ordered gardens and marble palaces of court life. On the morning of the 6th day, they arrived at the temple. It was carved directly into the mountainside, a structure so ancient that Devendra wondered if perhaps it had not been carved at all, but rather had always been there, waiting to be revealed. Stone pillars rose from the earth like offerings to the sky. Intricate carvings of gods and demons covered every surface. Prayer flags, faded from years of wind and sun, fluttered from ropes strung between the buildings. Monks moved quietly through the courtyards, their crimson robes a splash of color against the gray stone. No one seemed surprised to see Ashok arrive with a stranger. They simply nodded in greeting and continued their work, sweeping the courtyards, tending gardens, carrying water from the mountain spring. "This is the Temple of the Sacred Tiger," Ashok explained as they dismounted. "It has stood here for over 500 years. We live outside the reach of empires here. The emperors respect our sanctuary. It is one of the last places in the world where a man can truly disappear." "I cannot hide forever," Devendra said, his voice hoarse from disuse. "No," Ashok agreed. "But you will hide here until the truth emerges. And the truth has a way of surfacing, no matter how deeply people try to bury it." The monk led him through the temple grounds to a small stone building at the rear of the complex. Inside was a simple room with a cot, a small table, shelves holding books and scrolls, and a window that looked out toward the snow-capped peaks in the distance. "This will be your home," Ashok said. "You will not be a prisoner here. You are free to walk the grounds, to study, to pray if your heart moves you to do so. But you must not leave. You must not contact anyone from your old life. You must allow the world to believe that Prince Devendra is dead." "And in exchange?" Devendra asked. Ashok turned to look at him, and his ancient eyes held a depth of knowledge that unsettled Devendra. "In exchange, you will learn why you were saved. And you will prepare yourself for the day when you must face your brother again." That day did not come for a long time. But fate, it seemed, was patient. 3 months into his stay at the temple, Devendra discovered the tiger. He had been walking in the courtyard early one morning, as had become his habit, when he heard a low growl emanating from one of the stone enclosures at the edge of the temple grounds. At first, he thought it was a guard dog, but as he approached, he realized it was something far more dangerous. The tiger was massive, nearly as long as Devendra was tall, with stripes like burnt gold and rust against white cream fur. Its amber eyes were fixed on him with an intensity that made his blood freeze. In all his years at court, Devendra had seen paintings of tigers, had studied them in the imperial menagerie, but he had never been this close to one. He had never seen the sheer power of the animal, the coiled muscles, the casual certainty of a predator at rest. "Maharaja," a voice called from behind him. It was Ashok, descending the temple steps. "You have found Jaya." "Jaya?" Devendra asked, not taking his eyes off the tiger. He means victory in Sanskrit, Ashera explained, coming to stand beside Devendra. The tiger is 7 years old. He was caught in a poacher's trap when he was young, an accident that nearly killed him and left him permanently injured. His back left leg does not function as it should. He cannot hunt effectively in the wild. He cannot survive. So we brought him here. Devendra watched as Ashera approached the enclosure. The tiger's growl intensified, but Ashera seemed unbothered. He moved slowly, speaking in a low, gentle voice, and when he reached the wooden gate, the tiger actually approached, limping slightly as Ashera had described. The monk reached through the bars and ran his hand along the tiger's face. The animal's growl became something softer, almost a purr. "He is dangerous," Ashera said without turning around. "And he is also one of the loneliest creatures I have ever known. He knows he is different from his kind. He knows he cannot survive as tigers are meant to survive. In many ways, he and you are not so different, Devendra. You are both trapped between two worlds, unable to return to one, unable to fully enter the other." Devendra stepped closer. Every rational part of his brain screamed that this was insane, that a man did not approach a wounded, possibly aggressive tiger. But something else moved in him, a recognition, perhaps, or a kinship born from shared suffering. "What happened to him?" Devendra asked. "After the poachers? We found him dying on the mountain road," Ashera said. "A merchant reported seeing a tiger that could barely move. We brought him here, treated his wounds, healed what could be healed. But his leg will never fully recover. He will always limp. He will always be marked by what happened to him." Ashera stepped back from the gate, and the tiger's attention shifted to Devendra. For a long moment, they simply looked at each other, the caged man and the caged tiger, both bearing the invisible scars of trauma, both wondering if they would ever be whole again. Devendra reached out his hand slowly. His palm was scarred from the chains, and the movement sent small shards of pain up his arm. But he did not stop. He placed his hand against the bars. The tiger approached, and for a moment Devendra thought he would be attacked. But instead, the great head tilted, and the tiger rubbed its face against Devendra's hand, a gesture of surprising gentleness. At that moment, something shifted inside Devendra's chest. For the first time in 7 years, he did not feel entirely alone. "Tomorrow," Ashera said quietly, "I will show you how to care for him. It seems the goddess has plans for you both." Weeks turned into months, and Devendra's entire world restructured itself around Jaya the tiger. Each morning, before dawn, he would arrive at the enclosure with fresh meat brought from the village below. He would clean the stone floors, change the water, and speak to Jaya in a low, constant voice about nothing and everything. He talked about his childhood, about the gardens he had loved, about his mother's laugh. He talked about his imprisonment, about the darkness that had consumed him, about the fear that he would die before anyone ever knew he was innocent. Jaya listened, or at least, he seemed to listen. His amber eyes would follow Devendra around the enclosure, and over time, his aggressive posture softened. The snarls became fewer. The moments where he approached the bars to be near Devendra became more frequent. Ashera had taught him how to move, how to read the tiger's moods, how to know when Jaya was in pain or distress. A tiger, the monk had explained, is not so different from a human being. Both are capable of great violence and great gentleness. Both are wounded by betrayal. Both can learn to trust again, though the learning is slow and painful. It was during these months that Devendra began to understand something profound about his own suffering. In caring for Jaya, in learning to see past the danger and the scarred exterior to the being within, he began to see himself differently as well. He had been wounded by the cruelty of his own family, marked by betrayal, trapped in circumstances beyond his control. But like Jaya, he was not defined by those wounds. He was still capable of connection, of tenderness, of purpose. One afternoon, as he sat by the enclosure cleaning Jaya's water trough, Ashera found him. "There is news from the capital," the monk said quietly. "A merchant brought word. Your brother grows more paranoid. He has ordered purges of anyone he suspects of loyalty to you. Dozens of court officials have been executed. Generals who served your father are being replaced with Ashok's own men. The empire is becoming more tyrannical." Devendra felt a chill run through him. "The people," he asked, "how do they respond?" "With fear," Ashera said, "but also with doubt. There are whispers that perhaps Ashok himself orchestrated your fall. Whispers that the prince was innocent and was murdered. Some are calling it a great injustice. Your brother's paranoia is feeding the very conspiracy he fears. What does this mean? Devendra asked. It means, Ashera said slowly, that the time may be approaching when you must consider your next steps. The truth is beginning to emerge, but slowly. A man of honor and intelligence could perhaps guide that emergence, could perhaps face his brother once more and demand justice. Devendra's hands trembled as he heard these words. For so long, he had allowed himself to remain numb, to accept that this life at the temple, tending to a wounded tiger, was his entire future. But Ashera was suggesting something far more dangerous, that he reclaim his life, that he face the man who had destroyed him, that he risk everything once more. That night, he sat by Jaya's enclosure, and for the first time in months, he wept. The tiger, sensing his distress, came and lay close to the bars, and they sat together in the darkness, two wounded creatures contemplating a future neither could fully imagine. It was a cool evening in late autumn when Ashera called Devendra to the temple's inner sanctuary. The old monk sat before a collection of scrolls and documents spread across a wooden table. By the light of oil lamps, Devendra could see that these were official imperial seals, letters bearing the mark of high court officials, and what appeared to be copies of testimony from the trial that had condemned him. 3 months ago, Ashera began, a man came to this temple. He was dying. He had been poisoned, or so he claimed, by Emperor Ashok. Before he passed, he gave me these documents and told me his story. Devendra's heart raced. What story? The man was Minister Rajesh, Ashera said. He was one of the officials who testified against you. He was one of the men Ashok bribed to tell lies at your trial. Devendra felt rage flash through his body, pure, burning rage that threatened to consume him. Then why did Ashera bring him here? Why did you help him? Because, Ashera said calmly. In the final days of his life, he suffered a change of heart. He told me that he had haunted him for 7 years, the knowledge of what he had done, the innocent blood on his hands. He wanted, before he died, to leave a record of the truth. He wanted his son to know that his father had not been entirely a coward, that at the very end, he had tried to make amends. Ashera gestured to the scrolls. These are his confessions, written in his own hand, witnessed by myself and 2 other monks. They detail exactly how Ashok orchestrated your fall. They name every official who was bribed. They contain copies of the forged letters your brother created. They are, Prince Devendra, the evidence that could restore your name and bring your brother to justice. Devendra stared at the scrolls, hardly daring to touch them. Why give them to me now? Because, Ashera said, I have received word that your brother grows even more unstable. His generals are beginning to question his rule. There is talk of rebellion. There is a window of opportunity, but it will not remain open long. The empire stands on a precipice. A single truth, revealed at the right moment, could tip the balance toward justice or toward complete chaos. If I do this, Devendra said slowly, if I emerge from hiding with these documents and challenge my brother, what will happen? I cannot tell you, Ashera admitted. The future is not mine to see. But I can tell you this. You were saved for a reason. The goddess does not preserve a life without purpose. Your purpose, I believe, is to reclaim the truth and restore balance to an empire that has become corrupted by lies. That night, Devendra sat with Jaya for hours, holding the scrolls but not yet reading them. He knew that once he read them, everything would change. He would no longer be a man at peace in a temple. He would become, once again, a man of action, of risk, of consequence. The tiger seemed to sense his conflict. Jaya lay very still, his great head resting on his paws, his amber eyes watching Devendra with what seemed like ancient wisdom. What would you do? Devendra whispered to the tiger. If you had to choose between safety and truth? Jaya did not answer, of course. But as Devendra sat there in the darkness, he realized that he already knew what he had to do. The tiger had shown him the answer through his own example. Jaya could have remained bitter about his lameness, could have refused connection with Devendra, could have chosen solitude and rage. But instead, the tiger had chosen to trust, to connect, to find meaning in relationships. And Devendra would choose truth, no matter what it cost him. The letter Devendra composed took 3 days to write. It was addressed to General Vikram, the highest-ranking military commander in the empire and a man who had served Devendra's father with unwavering loyalty. In it, Devendra revealed his survival, provided key details that only he and his father could have known, and requested a secret meeting. 2 weeks later, a response came. General Vikram would meet him in the ruins of an ancient fortress 3 days' journey from the capital. He would come alone. The night before Devendra's departure, he stood at Jaya's enclosure one final time. He did not know if he would ever return to the temple. He did not know if he would survive what was coming. But he knew that he could not ask Jaya to come with him, even though some part of him wanted to. The tiger was safe here. The tiger had found a kind of peace. "I don't know if I'll see you again," Devendra said, his voice breaking slightly. "But I want you to know that you saved me, Jaya. You showed me that it was possible to trust again, to connect again, to find meaning in something beyond pain. Whatever happens to me now, I carry that lesson with me." He reached through the bars and touched Jaya's face one last time. The tiger rubbed against his hand with a tenderness that nearly broke Devendra's heart. The next morning, he rode down the mountain with 2 monks as escorts. He had shaved, and they had provided him with clothes that, while simple, were far better than the rags he had worn in prison. He looked nothing like the broken man who had arrived at the temple months ago. He looked like a prince again. He looked like someone who had something to fight for. The journey to the fortress took them through lowlands and into regions where Devendra might be recognized. Ashok had insisted on disguising him as a merchant, with bandages on his wrists to hide the scars from his chains. It was a risk, but a necessary one. They traveled at night and hid during the day. Twice they saw palace guards, and both times Devendra's heart nearly stopped, certain that he would be captured. But the disguise held. They never stopped. On the evening of the 3rd day, they reached the fortress. It was an ancient structure, dating back centuries, built on a high ridge that overlooked the plains below. The stones were crumbling, and vegetation had reclaimed much of the structure, but it was remote enough that no one would stumble upon them by accident. General Vikram arrived as the sun was setting, casting the world in shades of orange and red. He came alone, as promised, on a single horse. When he saw Devendra standing in the courtyard of the ruins, the old general's knees actually buckled. "Prince," he whispered, falling to his knees. "Forgive me. Forgive me for not fighting harder, for not believing in your innocence, for allowing your brother to." "Rise," Devendra said gently, helping the old man to his feet. "There is nothing to forgive. You did what you could under impossible circumstances." For the next several hours, as night fell around them, Devendra told Vikram everything. He told him about the temple, about Jaya, about the evidence of his brother's conspiracy. He showed the general the scrolls and watched as the color drained from Vikram's weathered face. "This is enough," Vikram said finally, his voice trembling with emotion. "This is more than enough. With this evidence and my testimony, we can bring down Emperor Ashok. We can restore you to your rightful place." "And the cost?" Devendra asked. "If we move against him openly, there will be war. There will be bloodshed. There will be war anyway," Vikram said grimly. "Your brother's paranoia is destabilizing the entire empire. Generals are being murdered. Provinces are rebelling. If we do not act now, the dynasty will collapse into chaos. At least this way, we fight for truth and justice." Devendra looked out at the dark landscape, thinking of Jaya waiting in the temple, thinking of Ashara's belief that his life had been preserved for a purpose. Perhaps this was that purpose. Perhaps he had been given a second chance not for his own sake, but for the sake of an empire that had been poisoned by lies. "Then we will act," Devendra said. "But we must be careful. We must move slowly, building alliances, gathering supporters. My brother has spies everywhere. One careless move, and we will all die." General Vikram nodded. "I have already begun the work. There are generals, provincial governors, and court officials who have grown weary of Ashok's tyranny. They are waiting only for a sign, for proof that an alternative exists. You are that proof, Prince Devendra. You are hope made flesh." As they spoke deep into the night, planning their strategy, Devendra felt something he had not felt in 7 years, the weight of genuine responsibility. It was heavier than the chains that had bound him, but it was a weight that gave his life meaning once more. Over the next 3 months, Devendra and General Vikram carefully constructed a network of allies. They could not move openly, could not risk Ashok learning of Devendra's survival. So they worked in shadow, sending coded messages, arranging secret meetings, gradually turning the tide of support within the empire. The first to join their cause was General Sharma, commander of the eastern provinces. He had been one of Devendra's father's most trusted officers and had watched with growing horror as Ashok purged the military of experienced leaders. With Sharma's support came the loyalty of 3 major army divisions. Next came Minister Karan, who had been investigating the corruption spreading through the imperial court under Ashok's rule. Karan had discovered evidence of embezzlement, of bribes, of officials trafficking in slavery. When Devendra approached him with the scrolls proving that Ashok had orchestrated his brother's downfall, Karan wept. He committed his entire department to the cause. One by one, other officials joined them. The priesthood of the major temples declared their support, claiming that the goddess herself had spoken to them of an innocent man preserved by divine will. Merchants and traders, tired of paying exorbitant taxes to feed Ashok's paranoia, began to secretly fund their cause. But the most crucial ally came from an unexpected source. One evening, as Devendra sat in a safe house in the city of Mathura, discussing strategy with Vikram, a messenger arrived bearing a letter sealed with the mark of the imperial palace. Devendra's blood ran cold. It was a trap. It had to be a trap. But when he opened the letter, he found words that shook him to his core. The letter was from his brother. Not from Ashok the emperor, but from Ashok the man. In carefully veiled language, Ashok wrote that he wished to meet with Devendra, that he wanted to speak about the past and find some kind of resolution. He claimed to feel remorse for what he had done, to recognize that his actions had been motivated by jealousy and fear. He asked Devendra to meet him alone, unarmed, at the temple where Devendra had been hiding. "It's a trap," General Vikram said immediately. "Your brother means to kill you himself. He has discovered that you survived, and now he wants to end this once and for all." But Devendra was uncertain. He read the letter again, looking for the threads of authenticity hidden between the words. And he found them. There was something in Ashok's writing, a desperation, a longing, that suggested this was not merely a military stratagem, but a genuine reach across years of betrayal. "Perhaps," Devendra said slowly, "my brother has also been suffering under the weight of his lies. Perhaps he, like me, has been trapped by what he has done." "You cannot trust him," Vikram urged. "He is the emperor. He commands armies. He will use this meeting to destroy you." "Perhaps," Devendra acknowledged. "But if there is even a possibility of reaching him, of making him understand the error of his ways, should I not try? Will I not regret forever if I do not at least attempt to reclaim my brother, as well as my throne?" It was this question that, ultimately, led Devendra to agree to the meeting. The ride back to the temple took 2 days. Devendra traveled in secret, with only General Vikram and 2 trusted guards, moving through mountain passes and forest roads where they would not be seen. The plan was that Vikram and the guards would remain hidden, watching from a distance. If Ashok made any move that seemed threatening, they would intervene. It was autumn again, a year and a half since Devendra had first arrived at the temple. The leaves were turning gold and crimson, and a chill hung in the mountain air. Devendra's heart raced as they approached the temple grounds. Ashok was waiting for him at the gates. The old monk embraced Devendra without a word, and Devendra understood that Ashok had already known what was coming. The goddess, apparently, spoke to the old man regularly. "Your brother waits by the courtyard," Ashok said. "He came alone, as he promised. He has shown no signs of aggression. But be careful, Devendra. The heart of a man can hold contradictions. One can feel genuine remorse and still be capable of terrible things." Devendra nodded, and with each step toward the courtyard, his anxiety grew. What would he see when he looked upon his brother's face? Would he see the man who had destroyed him, or would he see the brother he had once loved? Emperor Ashok stood in the courtyard, and Devendra's breath caught in his throat. His brother had aged dramatically. Where once he had been robust and vital, he was now thin, almost gaunt. His hair had turned almost entirely white, and his eyes held a haunted quality that Devendra recognized intimately. These were the eyes of a man who had not slept well in years. For a long moment, neither brother spoke. They simply looked at each other across a courtyard that felt like it contained years of suffering and loss. "Devendra," Ashok finally said, his voice breaking. "You're alive." "I'm alive," Devendra confirmed. "Though for 7 years, I was not certain I wanted to be. Ashok flinched as if struck. I can explain. Why? Devendra interrupted. Why did you do it? Why did you betray me? Ashok's face crumpled, and tears began to stream down his weathered cheeks. Because I was afraid, he said, his voice small and broken. I was afraid that you would always be superior to me, that father would always love you more, that I would spend my entire life in your shadow. I was jealous, Devendra. I was consumed by it. And that jealousy led me to do something so terrible that I have not known a single moment of peace since. He stepped forward, and Devendra tensed, but Ashok simply fell to his knees. I have seen you in my dreams every night for 7 years, Ashok continued. I have heard your voice calling out to me from the darkness. I thought perhaps I had had you killed, that you were truly gone, and the nightmares were some kind of divine punishment. But then I learned the truth. I learned that you had survived, and I realized that perhaps the goddess had preserved you for a reason. Perhaps she wanted you to know that I had suffered, that my victory was hollow, that everything I obtained by destroying you has tasted like ash and poison. Devendra stood frozen, watching his brother weep at his feet. In this moment, he saw not the man who had condemned him, but the boy he had once known, the boy who had always felt overlooked, always felt less loved, always felt afraid. Stand up, Devendra said quietly. A man should not kneel when he is telling the truth. Ashok rose, his entire body trembling. I know I have no right to ask for your forgiveness. I know I have forfeited any claim on your love or respect, but I am asking anyway. Forgive me, brother. Not because I deserve forgiveness, but because perhaps both of us deserve to be free from the weight of this betrayal. In that moment, Devendra understood something profound. His brother was also a prisoner, not of dungeon walls, but of his own guilt, his own fear, his own jealousy. And the only way either of them could truly be free was if they could forgive each other. Devendra stepped forward and embraced his brother. For the first time in 7 years, Ashok wept not tears of guilt, but tears of catharsis. When Devendra and Ashok emerged from the courtyard where they had been speaking, Ashara appeared with a proposal. There is someone I wish you both to meet, the old monk said. Someone who, I believe, has a role to play in what must come next. He led them to Jaya's enclosure. The tiger was lying in the afternoon sun, and when he saw Devendra, he rose and approached the bars. But it was Ashok's reaction that truly moved Devendra. The emperor stood frozen, staring at the great beast with an expression of wonder and recognition. He's magnificent, Ashok whispered. How is he still alive? A tiger with an injury like that should not have survived. He has survived because he was given a reason to live, Ashara said gently. He was given care, kindness, and companionship. He was given someone to trust when all the world had taught him to fear. Devendra understood what Ashara was doing. The old monk was not simply showing Ashok a tiger. He was offering Ashok a mirror, a reflection of what was possible when damaged creatures were given a second chance. In the coming weeks, Ashara continued, there will be much change in your empire. There will be battles and losses and the reckoning with betrayal. But I want you both to remember this moment. I want you to remember that even the most wounded among us can be healed if we are given the opportunity to trust again. Ashok turned to look at his brother, and Devendra could see the understanding dawning in his eyes. His brother was finally beginning to comprehend the magnitude of what he had done, not just to Devendra, but to himself. That evening, in the temple's inner sanctum, Devendra and Ashok made a covenant. It was not a covenant of conquest or power, but of truth and redemption. Ashok, as the sitting emperor, would use his authority to declare publicly that he had been wrong, that his younger brother had been innocent of all charges. The documents, the scrolls bearing Minister Rajesh's confession, would be presented to the court and to the people. But this was not enough for Devendra. He did not wish to take his brother's throne. He did not wish to undo him as he himself had been undone. I want something else, Devendra said as they sat before the temple's altar. I want a new kind of empire. One built not on the fear of tyrants, but on justice and truth. I want you to remain emperor, Ashok, but I want you to rule differently. I want us to rule together, as brothers, with councils of wise men and women to counsel us. I want the provinces to have a voice in their governance. I want the people to know that their emperor serves them, not himself. Ashok stared at his brother with an intensity that bordered on disbelief. You would do this? After everything I have done to you, would you offer me not merely forgiveness, but partnership? Because, Devendra said, Ashera taught me something through that tiger. He taught me that healing requires not just the removal of the poison, but the introduction of something new, something better. You poison the empire with lies and fear, but we can heal it together with truth and compassion. Ashok wept again, but this time his tears were different. They were tears of genuine transformation, of a man catching a glimpse of who he might become if given the chance. I will do it, Ashok said. I will rebuild my rule on the foundation of what you describe. But I need your help, brother. I cannot do this alone. Then we will do it together, Devendra said. And we will have allies to help us. General Vikram has already begun building a coalition of support. Minister Karen has evidence of corruption we must address. We have the priesthood, the merchants, the people themselves. We have more power than we realize if we use it wisely. Over the next 3 days, they discussed every detail of what would come next, how they would announce the truth to the court, how they would consolidate power without causing a civil war, how they would begin implementing the reforms that Devendra envisioned. It was a delicate balance, requiring diplomacy, strategic planning, and careful manipulation of the information flowing through the empire. But for the first time, Devendra felt that such a thing was possible. For the first time, he believed that good could emerge from catastrophe. On the morning of the 3rd day, just before Ashok was to depart for the capital, he asked to spend time alone with Jaya. Devendra granted this request without question. He had learned that sometimes people needed to process their transformation in private, away from witnesses. When Ashok emerged from Jaya's enclosure an hour later, his face was transformed. There was a lightness to him, a sense of having released some great burden. The tiger, Ashok said quietly, looked at me with no judgment, no hatred. Despite all the cruelty and suffering in this world, he chose to remain gentle. He chose to trust me, a stranger. It was humbling. That is the gift that Jaya has, Devendra said. He teaches us that we are not defined by our worst actions, but by our capacity to change. The journey back to the capital was orchestrated with military precision. Ashok returned with a small contingent of trusted guards, a departure that would not raise suspicion, as the emperor frequently traveled for inspection of the provinces. But with him, hidden in the center of the caravan, was Devendra, still disguised. General Vikram had arranged for the court to be called to session 2 days after Ashok's arrival. During those 2 days, alliances were confirmed, wavering officials were convinced, and the evidence of Ashok's conspiracy against his brother was carefully distributed to key members of the court. By the time the full imperial assembly gathered in the great hall of the palace, a chamber that could hold 2,000 people, nearly everyone knew what was about to happen. And yet, when it happened, it still shocked the empire to its core. Emperor Ashok stood before his court, and in a voice that carried to every corner of the vast chamber, he proclaimed the truth. He described in detail how he had engineered Devendra's fall out of jealousy and fear. He presented the scrolls bearing Minister Rajesh's confession. He announced that he had been wrong, that his brother was innocent, and that this injustice must be corrected immediately. The chamber erupted in chaos. Some officials looked stricken, realizing they would face consequences for their false testimony. Others looked outraged that the emperor would so publicly admit to such a crime. Still others looked relieved, as if a great weight had been lifted from their shoulders. General Vikram stepped forward and called for order. When relative silence had been restored, he announced that Prince Devendra was alive, that he had been preserved by divine providence and the compassion of the priesthood, and that he stood ready to reclaim his place in the empire. And then the doors at the rear of the chamber opened, and Devendra walked forward. The impact was immediate and visceral. Many in the chamber had known Devendra before his fall. They saw in him echoes of Emperor Vikrama, the great leader who had founded the current dynasty. They saw not a man who had been broken by 7 years of imprisonment, but a man who had been tempered by suffering and refined into something greater than he had been before. Devendra walked to the center of the chamber and knelt before his brother. The gesture was deliberate, not a gesture of subservience, but of respect and reconciliation. And then Ashok rose and lifted Devendra to his feet, embracing him before the entire assembled court. The cheers that erupted shook the very foundations of the palace. Over the following months, a genuine transformation began to take hold in the empire. The first decree issued jointly by Emperor Ashok and Prince Devendra established a council of governors and wise men who would advise the throne. This council would have significant power. They could not be overridden by imperial decree without extraordinary justification. The second decree addressed the corruption that had proliferated under Ashok's paranoid rule. A commission was established to investigate all officials appointed during the previous 7 years. Those found to have accepted bribes or participated in corruption were publicly tried and, if convicted, stripped of their titles and lands. The third decree established something revolutionary, a system of justice that was independent from imperial whim. Courts would operate according to established law, and even the emperor himself would be subject to the decisions of these courts. It was a radical notion for the time, but Devendra had been convinced by the priesthood and minister Karen that it was essential for true peace. Not everyone supported these changes. Some conservative members of the nobility resisted. Some local warlords refused to acknowledge the authority of the new system. But gradually, through a combination of diplomacy and, when necessary, military enforcement, the reforms took hold. And in the midst of all this political transformation, something remarkable happened. The story of the tiger began to spread through the empire. Priests told the tale in temples. Merchants recounted it as they traveled. Poets began to compose epics about the sacred bond between Devendra and Jaya. The tiger became a symbol, not just of the emperor's redemption, but of the empire's transformation. The tiger represented the possibility of healing, of trust transcending natural boundaries, of compassion overcoming fear. People began to make pilgrimages to the temple in the mountains where Jaya lived, hoping to catch a glimpse of the sacred beast. Ashok, ever wise, allowed some of these pilgrimages, but strictly controlled them to ensure that Jaya was not disturbed. Devendra himself visited the temple as often as his imperial duties would allow. In those moments with Jaya, away from the complexity of governance and the weight of leadership, he found peace. The tiger seemed to understand the burden that Devendra carried. And in his presence, Devendra could simply be, not a prince, not an emperor, but a man who had been saved by grace and was trying to live in a way that honored that gift. But not everyone in the empire welcomed the changes that Devendra and Ashok were implementing. 6 months into the new reign, word came of a conspiracy forming among dissident nobles who felt threatened by the loss of their traditional power. These men had profited tremendously under Ashok's paranoid rule, serving as the emperor's eyes and ears in exchange for wealth and authority. The reforms threatened to strip them of their influence. They devised a plan to assassinate both brothers and install one of their own on the throne. The conspiracy was deep and complex, involving military officers, provincial governors, and even some members of the newly established Justice Council. It was General Vikram who discovered the plot, and only just in time. He came to Devendra with evidence. Messages sent in code, maps of the palace with marked assassination points, records of money changing hands to hire professional killers. We must act immediately, Vikram urged. We must arrest these men before they can execute their plan. If they are allowed to proceed, they will kill both you and your brother. The empire will descend into chaos. Devendra studied the evidence with a heavy heart. These were men who had served his father, men he had known since childhood. But they were also men who had been corrupted by power and greed. We will arrest them, Devendra agreed. But we will do it through the justice system I helped create. They will have trials. They will have the opportunity to defend themselves. Some of them may even be proven innocent if the evidence against them is circumstantial. You are being naive, Vikram warned. These men will not hesitate to kill you if given the opportunity. Mercy will be interpreted as weakness. Perhaps, Devendra acknowledged. But if I betray the principles I have established, if I allow fear to drive me back toward tyranny and arbitrary punishment, then what have we truly gained? I will not become my brother's mirror. I will not rule through fear. The trials of the conspirators took 3 weeks. The evidence was presented, the accused were given the opportunity to defend themselves, and justice was served according to law rather than imperial whim. Some conspirators were convicted and executed. Others were imprisoned. A few were acquitted when the evidence against them proved insufficient. The empire watched closely as these trials unfolded. And something remarkable happened. Instead of seeing the trials as weakness, people began to respect the commitment to justice. They saw an emperor who would not compromise his principles even when threatened with assassination. They saw a system that actually worked, that actually protected the innocent even in the midst of crisis. The conspirators' planned rebellion never materialized. They had been removed from power before they could act, and the conspiracy collapsed. But the plot also revealed something that disturbed Devendra deeply. One of the conspirators, General Desai, an officer who had served Devendra's father, left behind a confession. In it, he detailed how Ashok had secretly been feeding him information about the reforms that Devendra was implementing. Desai claimed that Ashok had expressed doubts about his brother's direction and had suggested that Desai's coup might correct course. When Devendra confronted his brother with this information, Ashok's face went pale. "It's not true," Ashok insisted. "I never encouraged Desai. I never expressed such doubts to him." "Then why did Desai claim you did?" Devendra asked, his voice controlled but his heart breaking. After everything they had overcome, after the reconciliation and the shared vision for the empire, was Ashok already plotting to undermine him? "Because he was trying to sow discord between us," Ashok said desperately. "He was trying to drive a wedge between brothers so that we would weaken ourselves. Can't you see? It's a strategy. It's manipulation." Devendra wanted to believe this. Part of him desperately wanted to believe that his brother was truly transformed. But doubt had taken root in his heart, and it grew with each passing day. He did what Devendra had learned to do in the temple. He went to Jaya. He made the journey to the mountains in secret, bringing only Ashera as a companion. And in the courtyard where the tiger lived, he laid out his dilemma. "I don't know if I can trust him," Devendra confessed to the old monk. "I don't know if his transformation was genuine, or if it was merely the result of fear and manipulation. How can I build an empire on a foundation of partnership if the partnership itself is built on a lie?" Ashera listened without speaking, and then he did something Devendra had never seen him do before. He opened Jaya's enclosure and led the tiger out into the courtyard. The great beast limped to where Devendra stood and settled beside him. "Look at this tiger," Ashera said softly. "Every day that he has lived here, he has made a choice. He could have remained bitter about his injury, could have refused connection, could have protected himself through aggression and isolation. But he chose, each day, to trust. Not because it was guaranteed to work out, not because Devendra gave him proof that he was worthy of trust, but because trust was the only thing that gave his suffering meaning." "You're saying I should trust Ashok?" Devendra asked. "I'm saying," Ashera corrected, "that the choice to trust is not about the other person's worthiness. It's about your own commitment to transformation. If you remain suspicious of your brother, you will find evidence of his guilt in every action. If you choose to trust him, you will find evidence of his redemption. The truth, perhaps, lies somewhere between. But the choice of which truth to live toward, that is yours alone." Devendra sat in silence for a long time, his hand resting on Jaya's warm fur. And then he understood. The test was not whether Ashok had truly changed. The test was whether Devendra had truly changed, whether he could move beyond the trauma of betrayal and rebuild his capacity for trust. When he returned to the capital, he did not accuse his brother. He did not distance himself. Instead, he called Ashok to a private chamber and told him about his doubts. Ashok listened without interruption, and when Devendra finished, his brother simply said, "I cannot prove to you that I have truly changed. I can only ask you, again, to trust me. And if I betray that trust, then you will have the right to act as justice requires. But I pray you, brother, give me the chance to prove that my transformation is genuine." And Devendra chose to trust. The reforms continued, but Devendra added a new dimension to them. Inspired by his time in the temple and his relationship with Jaya, he began to implement programs focused on rehabilitation rather than mere punishment. Criminals who were not violent were given the opportunity to reform, to earn their way back into society through labor and education. This was controversial. Many traditionalists argued that such compassion was a form of weakness, that it would encourage more crime. But Devendra was firm in his conviction. He had been given a second chance at life, and he would extend that same grace to others. The program was slow to gain acceptance, but over time, something remarkable happened. Crime rates actually began to decline, not because people feared punishment more, but because they began to believe that redemption was possible. Young people who might have turned to banditry or theft began to see alternative paths. Soldiers who had committed atrocities in war were given the opportunity to find peace through contemplation and service rather than through execution. And the empire, gradually, began to heal. Devendra established schools throughout the provinces. He brought in philosophers, mathematicians, physicians, and artists to teach. He believed that ignorance was often the root of violence, and that education was the most powerful tool for transforming society. He reformed the tax system to be more equitable, so that the burden did not fall entirely on the poorest. He established granaries throughout the empire to protect against famine. He funded irrigation projects to increase agricultural productivity. These were not revolutionary ideas. Many empires throughout history had implemented similar policies. But Devendra implemented them systematically, with genuine commitment to the welfare of the people rather than merely as a means of maintaining control. And throughout all of this, the image of the tiger remained central to the mythology of his reign. Poets continued to compose epics about Jaya and Devendra. Artists created sculptures and paintings depicting the sacred bond between man and beast. The tiger became not just a symbol, but a living lesson in the possibility of transformation and healing. 10 years after his escape from the dungeon, Devendra found himself facing a new challenge, the question of succession. He had never married, had never fathered children. He had devoted himself entirely to the work of governing and healing the empire. Now, in his early 40s, he was beginning to think seriously about who would carry his vision forward after he was gone. It would have been natural to assume that Ashok would name an heir from among his own sons. But Ashok had never married either, had spent his reign focused entirely on supporting Devendra's transformation of the empire. It was as if both brothers had sacrificed personal happiness for the sake of a greater vision. One evening, as Devendra sat with Ashok, now very old, his health failing, he posed the question, "What will happen to the empire when I am gone?" Devendra asked, "I have built something beautiful, I believe, but will it survive my death? Or will it crumble under someone less committed to these principles?" Ashok was quiet for a long time. The old monk was barely recognizable now, his body withered, his voice a whisper, but his eyes still held their ancient wisdom. "The empire will face challenges," Ashok said finally. "There will be leaders who will try to revert to the old ways of fear and tyranny. But you have planted seeds, Devendra. You have taught people to think differently, to believe in justice and compassion. Those seeds will grow, even in soil that is less receptive. Do not mistake the death of one tree for the death of the forest." "But who will lead?" Devendra pressed. "That," Ashok said, "is something you must decide. But I would suggest looking not among the nobility, but among the people themselves. Find someone who has been forged by suffering, as you have been. Find someone who understands what it means to be broken and to be healed. Find someone who loves Jaya." Devendra did not understand the final comment, but he took Ashok's advice seriously. Over the next year, he quietly observed his administrators and officers, looking for someone with the qualities Ashok had described. He found her in an unexpected place. Her name was Priya, and she was a former slave who had been purchased by the empire under Devendra's rehabilitation program. She had been working in the palace kitchens for 3 years, slowly learning to read and write, earning her freedom through honest labor. Devendra noticed her one day, standing in the courtyard where Jaya was kept, speaking to the tiger in a low voice, tears streaming down her face. When he asked her what she was doing, she said, "I come here to remember that there is goodness in the world. This tiger has every reason to hate humans. We trapped him, we wounded him, we caged him. But he chose kindness anyway. I wanted to thank him for that lesson." Devendra was deeply moved. He began to mentor Priya, teaching her history, politics, philosophy, and the principles that had guided his reign. He watched as she grew in wisdom and compassion. And gradually, he came to realize that Ashok was right. Priya had been broken by her enslavement, and she had been healed by the compassion extended to her. She understood, in a way that nobility could never understand, what it meant to rebuild a life from devastation. When the time came to formally name a successor, someone who would carry forward his vision even after he was no longer able to lead, he named Priya. The announcement shocked the empire. A former slave elevated to the highest position in the land? It was unthinkable. Many nobles openly opposed the decision. But Devendra was firm, and more importantly, the people supported him. They saw in Priya a reflection of their own hopes for transformation and redemption. 20 years after his escape from the dungeon, Devendra knew that his time was running out. He was in his early 50s, but the years of imprisonment and the weight of empire building had taken their toll. His body was failing, his energy waning. He made one final pilgrimage to the temple in the mountains. Ashok was long dead. He had passed away peacefully 5 years prior, in his sleep, leaving behind a legacy of wisdom and divine insight that the priesthood still spoke of in reverent whispers. But the temple remained, tended by monks who remembered Devendra and honored his history. And Jaya was still alive. The tiger was now in his late 20s, ancient for a wild creature in captivity. He was nearly blind from cataracts, his movements slow and stiff. But when Devendra entered the courtyard, Jaya lifted his head and released a low rumble that sounded like a greeting. Devendra spent 3 days at the temple. During the day, he sat with Jaya, talking about his life, about the empire he had built, about the future he hoped would unfold. At night, he meditated in the temple's inner sanctum, preparing his heart and spirit for the death that he knew was coming. On the morning of the 4th day, he woke to find that Jaya had died peacefully in the night. The tiger lay still in the courtyard, his amber eyes closed, his great body finally at rest. Devendra sat beside his oldest friend and wept. But these were not tears of sorrow alone. They were tears of gratitude for all that Jaya had taught him, for the bond that had transcended species and time. The monks of the temple prepared Jaya's body with all the honors of a deity. They cremated him with sacred rituals, and Devendra himself scattered the ashes from the highest point of the temple, watching them drift on the wind toward the distant mountains and valleys. "Thank you," he whispered to the ashes. "Thank you for saving my life. Thank you for teaching me that we are more than our wounds. Thank you for showing me that love and trust can transcend all boundaries." When Devendra returned to the capital, he officially and formally stepped down from power, transferring all authority to Priya. He did not retire completely. He established himself as an advisor and elder statesman, but the active governance of the empire passed to the former slave who had learned to speak to tigers. To everyone's surprise, Priya thrived. She brought fresh perspectives to governance, implementing reforms that even Devendra had not considered. She continued his commitment to education and rehabilitation, but she also pioneered new systems of trade and commerce that enriched the empire while distributing wealth more equitably. Most importantly, she maintained Devendra's core vision, that an empire's strength lay not in the fear it instilled, but in the justice it dispensed and the opportunities it provided for all people to flourish. Under Priya's leadership, the empire entered a golden age. The provinces that had been rebellious under Ashok's paranoid rule became stable and productive. Trade routes flourished, the arts and sciences advanced, and the story of Devendra and Jaya remained central to the mythology of the empire, a constant reminder that transformation was possible, that redemption was real, that love could bridge seemingly unbridgeable divides. Devendra lived to see 15 years of Priya's reign. He spent his final years as an elder in the palace, mentoring younger administrators, writing about philosophy and governance, and continuing to visit the temple in the mountains to pay his respects at Jaya's shrine. When he finally died, at the age of 68, the empire mourned as if mourning a god. Temples were erected in his honor. Poets composed epics about his life. Scholars debated his philosophical contributions to statecraft and ethics. And the image of the tiger, of Jaya, became permanently enshrined in the iconography of the empire. But perhaps more important than monuments and statues was the fact that his vision endured. Priya passed her commitment to his principles on to her successor, who passed it on to the next and the next. The reforms he had implemented became so embedded in the fabric of the empire that later rulers could not revert to the old ways without facing massive resistance from the people. The empire did face challenges in the centuries to come. There were leaders who tried to expand through conquest rather than through justice. There were times when the commitment to compassion wavered in the face of external threats. But always, there was the story of Devendra and Jaya to remind people of what was possible when a man chose love over vengeance, when trust triumphed over fear. Scholars in later ages would debate whether the story was historical fact or legend. Some argued that a prince imprisoned for 7 years and then reconciled with his brother was too perfect to be true. Others pointed to contemporary records that seemed to corroborate key elements of the narrative. But whether the story was literal truth or mythical truth, its impact on the empire was undeniable. It had transformed a civilization. In the final century of the empire, before it eventually fell, as all empires do, to the inexorable march of time and the rise of new powers, there stood still, in the mountains far from the capital, the temple of the sacred tiger. The temple had become a pilgrimage site for seekers from across the known world. Monks maintained a shrine to both Devendra and Jaya, and thousands came each year to pray, to meditate, to seek their own redemption and transformation. In the shrine's inner sanctum stood a statue carved from white stone, depicting a man and a tiger, their heads bowed together, their eyes closed. The sculptor had captured something ethereal in the pose, not a moment of dominance or submission, but a moment of perfect understanding, of two beings recognizing in each other a reflection of the divine. The inscription beneath the statue read, "In the bond between Devendra and Jaya, the empire found its salvation." In their story, we are reminded that love transcends all boundaries, that trust can be rebuilt, and that redemption is always possible for those who seek it with an open heart. And pilgrims would come and place their hands on this statue, and weep, and pray, and find within themselves the courage to forgive, to trust again, to believe in transformation. The empire eventually fell. Empires always do. But the lesson of Devendra and Jaya did not fall with it. The story spread, carried by merchants and priests and storytellers, until it reached lands that had never heard of the empire itself. It became a universal tale, retold in countless variations, adapted to different cultures and times, but always carrying the same core message, that we are not defined by our worst moments, that redemption is possible, that trust can be rebuilt, that love is the most powerful force in the universe, and that a tiger and a man, wounded and broken, can find in each other the grace to heal an entire world. To you, dear reader, if you have read this story to the end, you have experienced the power of redemption, the possibility of transformation, and the sacred bond between human and animal that reminds us of our own capacity for compassion. But stories like this do not exist in isolation. In the real world, right now, there are animals like Jaya, wounded, broken, abandoned, waiting for someone to show them that the world still contains kindness. If this story moved your heart, if you found yourself weeping for Devendra's suffering or celebrating his redemption, then I ask you to take that emotion and transform it into action. There are organizations dedicated to rescuing and rehabilitating animals that have been abused, abandoned, or left to die. There are sanctuaries for tigers and other magnificent creatures. There are people working tirelessly to give animals like Jaya a second chance at life. Please visit and support Harappa's Rescue, a sanctuary dedicated to the belief that every creature, no matter how broken, deserves the chance to heal and to be loved. At Harappa's Rescue, we believe that in saving these animals, we are also saving ourselves. We are proving that compassion is not weakness. We are demonstrating that redemption is real. Whether you can donate, volunteer, spread our message, or simply hold the vision of a more compassionate world in your heart, your support matters. Every contribution, no matter how small, brings hope to an animal in need. Every share of our message brings us closer to a world where creatures like Jaya are never left to suffer alone. Subscribe to our channel. Follow our mission. Be part of the healing. Because in the end, we are all like Devendra and Jaya, wounded, searching for connection, hoping against hope that redemption is possible. And together, we can make it real. With deep gratitude and infinite hope. Harappa's Rescue, where every creature finds its way home.